how the people are doing. So, now this comparison, it's gonna be a little different. You see, I spent the last week in Dubai and I didn't really take a lot of outdoor shots. I took a few here and there, but mostly did not because I was involved at Dubai. It's this huge exhibition, art exhibition, and essentially it's got just this massive number of people over there, artists, artworks, the quality, everything about the place, the scale is through the roof. You'll see soon enough why I say that. And well, let's jump in because there is, after all, a lot to talk about. So as per usual, we shall be taking a look at the color profiles, and this is particularly interesting because the lighting in this place, in this massive exhibition hall, was not exactly ideal. It was good, but not ideal, not like daylight, so to speak, which is why you can tell that, like a Vibrant on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it just isn't working out. The iPhone, on the other hand, it's good, it's very balanced. This is kind of the situation where the iPhone can really shine because it is very neutral in the way it processes images. But I do feel like the iPhone is kind of dark, especially like my skin tone feels almost underexposed for some reason. Now, like Authentic on the Xiaomi, now this is basically doing a perfect job because it has the same kind of neutral balanced look that the iPhone is producing, but it is handling contrast and exposure perfectly. I really have nothing to complain about. Now here's another one in way better lighting, as you can tell, at least on the Xiaomi, because once again my skin particularly looks really dark. I don't really understand why, because my skin, the exposure on my skin should be much closer to what we're getting on the Xiaomi. The Xiaomi, with like Authentic, once again, it is producing a near perfect result. It is unfortunate if you really like a Vibrant, then the Xiaomi isn't really handling the situation here, the lighting here, all that well. But with Leica Authentic particularly, which is something that I really like to use all the time, it is doing a near perfect job. Now moving on to the ultrawide camera, I do think that this time the Xiaomi's colors, the Leica Vibrant colors, are very similar to that of the iPhone. It's not as big a difference as we saw in the previous main camera shots. Now, I do think the iPhone is sharpening things a little bit more. I can see a little bit more texture on the carpet and stuff like that. It's not a massive difference. Switching over to Leica Authentic though, you can very clearly see that the Xiaomi is bumping up the contrast by quite a bit. You can particularly see that there are some blown out highlights, and also the structures in the ceiling, they kind of have a few more crushed shadows. It's not particularly bad or anything, but I don't know, I feel like it's a little inconsistent, especially when switching to the ultrawide camera. Now for a backlit ultrawide shot, yes, I finally managed to take a shot of the Dubai frame. I've actually never been there before. Also, the size, this thing, it's I don't think any kind of picture would ever do it justice because it looks so much smaller than it actually is. I can guarantee it's way bigger than even what you're imagining, unless you've actually been there. Well, in that case you would know. But regardless, I think the images themselves are pretty much the same across the board. They look phenomenal, exactly as you would expect from flagships, especially because Apple finally improved the HDR processing with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, or well, the Pro series. Because previous generations, I remember the 13 Pro, the 14 Pro, they all would suffer in situations like these. Now then for macro, you see, the Xiaomi has an interesting approach to this. It uses something called the floating telephoto macro. Essentially, it's using the 3.2x telephoto camera for macro shots, which is good because you get a massive boost in the depth of field. And secondly, you also don't have any issues with distortion that you would get with the ultrawide camera. You can kind of see the distortion on the iPhone here, but not too much. What the iPhone can do, however, is get way close as opposed to the Xiaomi, or I think any other phone. For the most part, I think the Samsung flagships can get about as close as the iPhones, but that's about it. Now let's check out zoom. So this is a 1x shot, and I'm using Leica Authentic because in a situation like this and in various other situations as well, I think Leica Authentic can just produce really well-balanced results because the lighting here was extensively variable and it's handling it like a champ. Now then for 2x, yes, we do get a 2x sensor crop on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. So far it has performed really well, so let's see how it stacks up against the iPhone. Yeah, the detail level is definitely a little bit higher on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra because there are certain things that you can just see a little bit more clearly, like the name of the artist who made this painting. Also, the contrast looks a little bit nicer on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. There's less grain on the Xiaomi as well. And now for 3x, see, this is something that only the Xiaomi has and the iPhone doesn't because the Xiaomi has two separate telephoto cameras. I'm cropping right in, I think it's pretty obvious, right? The Xiaomi is gonna pull ahead. It has optical zoom after all, and it's a very high quality camera on top of everything else. So yeah, you really shouldn't expect anything less. And now for 5x, this is kind of where the playing field is kind of equalized because both phones have very high quality 5x cameras. But of course, how far can they really zoom in, especially with hybrid digital zoom? So this right here is 10x. And although, upon first glance, you might think that yeah, it looks pretty much the same on both. The detail levels are the same on both, no doubt. But if you look at some of the shadows, you'll notice that the iPhone has significantly higher grain. Now then for 30x, so the approach on both is kind of different. The quality is pretty much the same, so to speak, but the iPhone definitely seems like it has more grain, but also more sharpness. It's not over sharpening, but it does have more sharpness. The Xiaomi goes for the opposite route here. It has less grain, more contrast, which is hiding more of the grain in the shadows, I guess, but it is also kind of lacking in the sharpness department, just a pinch as opposed to the iPhone. Now this right here is actually the painting that I was exhibiting, and well, this is 24 megapixels on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Well, every main camera shot on the iPhone is 24 megapixels. That's one of the major advantages that the iPhone has. The Xiaomi doesn't really do anything as such. So does the detail difference really matter? Well, that is precisely why we are zooming into 500%, and yeah, there's definitely more detail on the iPhone, but I do think that part of that is as a result of more sharpening happening on the iPhone, as opposed to the Xiaomi, which inherently does very low levels of sharpening. So in essence, I guess we could say yes, we get more detail on the iPhone. Part of that is from the high resolution, but do bear in mind that sharpening also plays a role here. Now then, for main camera high resolution, the iPhone has a very good track record of main camera high res, just so you know. But before we zoom in, I do want to point this out. I don't really know what's happening on the Xiaomi here, but it has this insane green tint, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because, as you can see, the iPhone is portraying the colors really well. There's a slight warm light falling on this insane sculpture, which by the way is actually made by an artisan. It looks absolutely crazy and beautiful. But anyways, when we crop into 500%, I mean, damn. There's a very good reason that the iPhone has such a good rep for high-res shots, because it only can do 48 megapixels with the main camera, but it pays off in spades. Because whatever processing that Apple is doing here, it is bloody perfect. It doesn't even look like I'm taking a high-res shot on the Xiaomi. And that says a lot because the Xiaomi's high-res is not bad, it's actually fairly good. But the iPhone is literally on a different level. Well, maybe not literally, but you get the point. Now, with the ultrawide camera, only the Xiaomi has high res, but does it even matter? Because a lot of the times, it has happened that smartphones have high res with the ultrawide camera, but they don't actually produce a lot of detail. Now, zooming into 500%, well, I do believe that the Xiaomi 14 Ultra does not have any extra detail being preserved as opposed to the iPhone, but there are two major differences. Not major, actually. They are slightly less over sharpening on the Xiaomi, and also there's slightly less grain on the Xiaomi. That's it. But to be fair, this is an ultra wide shot and you had to crop into 500% to barely see the difference. Does it really matter in the long run? That's kind of my question. Now, moving on to 3x. Now this is an artwork that I have no idea how it's even done, which is why it's so intriguing to me. But well, 3x is obviously something that only the Xiaomi has, so naturally it should do a better job, right? And thankfully, cropping into 500%, it definitely does. I mean, we really shouldn't be expecting anything less, right? Now then for 5x, well, the iPhone does have the optical zoom, but it doesn't really give us high res with it. The question is again, does it really matter? The simple answer is no, absolutely not, because with a 50 megapixel sensor, you expect at the very least to get more detail as opposed to a regular 12 megapixel sensor that we're getting on the iPhone, but that's obviously not the case. The iPhone is actually producing more detail. I can see more detail in the fur, and there is more grain on the iPhone as well. I'll give that to the Xiaomi, maybe that's how it's helping, but still, the detail level being lower than the iPhone, that's unacceptable. Now then, for selfies, you see, I'd actually completely forgotten to take selfies in World at Dubai, so I had to take these like a few hours before my flight, just had to crank it out. It's ill-advised, but well, I had to make it work. Now, I do think the iPhone tends to make the sky look really blue. Like, it obviously wasn't that blue, it's much more closer to how the Xiaomi 14 Ultra looks. And even the skin tones, I do prefer it slightly more on the Xiaomi. It's a very similar story here. I took these shots at around like 12 PM noon. And it obviously wasn't this blue of a sky. We just don't get that kind of sky at that point in time, and the Xiaomi is doing a much better job at reproducing that. It does have slightly less sharpening happening as opposed to the iPhone, which I do actually prefer. Now for a backlit selfie with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, well, I do think that here the detail difference is very obvious, or rather the sharpening difference, because you can see so much more detail is being brought out on the iPhone, on my shirt especially, as opposed to the Xiaomi. But to be honest, when it comes to human subjects in general, I actually prefer the more organic, less sharpened look that we're getting on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. I do wish it had a little bit more contrast like the iPhone, but one thing that I believe we can all agree on is that the highlight preservation is without question better on the Xiaomi. Now for selfie portraits, in this case at least, it's very similar. I do like the slightly higher saturation we're getting in the Xiaomi 14 Ultra skin tones, but honestly it's not that big a difference. Now for this one, there are two small differences that I think make me prefer the Xiaomi 14 Ultra here. The slightly more saturated skin tones, which I did prefer previously as well. The slightly less sharpening on the Xiaomi also helps, but it's also the sky in the background which looks way less artificially blue as opposed to the iPhone. Also, I did notice that the depth of field is very natural on the Xiaomi. Just look at the leaves right beside me, they don't look blurred out as opposed to the iPhone, which is completely blurring out everything except for me. Now just to drive home the sky problem, here's our final selfie portrait, and yes, I do prefer the skin tone on the Xiaomi a little bit more, but the real problem is with that sky just looking way too blue on the iPhone. Now there is a bit of magenta happening on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra sky in this particular case as well, but it's not as problematic as the iPhone, I guess. Now the night selfies, you see, I do believe that neither of these phones are particularly great when it comes to night selfies, but the fact is that nighttime in Dubai is so damn bright that it doesn't even matter. Both are producing fairly nice and detailed shots, but it's very obvious that the iPhone is handling the contrast so much better that it just looks like it's leagues ahead. Now then for portraits, see, this is where things are gonna get absolutely wild, because the iPhone 15 Pro Max has exceptional portraits. I really like the way the portraits come out. The Xiaomi absolutely sucks balls with portraits because essentially it has two modes. We have Leica portraits and master portraits, and neither of them work particularly well all of the time. In this case, I would say Leica portraits is working out fairly well. It is a little too high with the contrast and the way it's handling the colors. The balance is a little bit off, but it's not bad. However, master portrait is kind of just washing it out, removing every bit of the warmth which was present in the scene, as you can tell with the iPhone shot. Now for a 35mm shot, and in this case, I don't even know what's going on with the Xiaomi because it just looks ridiculous. So much yellow. I don't even know where it's getting all of that yellow from, because look at the iPhone. It looks perfect. Completely balanced, perfect skin tones. Nothing is out of the ordinary. Everything is perfectly balanced, exactly how you want your portrait to look. And what really surprises me is that Master Portrait doesn't help either. I thought Master Portrait was supposed to be the one that reins it all in and produces more balanced, slightly flatter looking results, but yeah, in this case there's nothing that's helping the Xiaomi. Now for a 50mm shot, which is essentially 2x, the iPhone looks basically perfect. You probably know that. But the Xiaomi, it is producing an insane level of contrast with Leica portraits, and it's a lot even for me, someone who is really fond of high contrast, so that should say a lot. And with master portraits, although the contrast is much more reined in now, but the warmth and just the colors are looking ridiculous. Look at the skin tone difference between the two. The iPhone is producing perfect skin tones and the Xiaomi, well, it's not. Now moving on, we have 75mm, which actually looks kinda nice on the Xiaomi. It might be a little too bright on my face. Obviously, the iPhone is doing a perfect job, there is no doubt about that. I believe I used 5x directly with the iPhone as opposed to using 75mm or the 3x zoom on the Xiaomi, because the iPhone doesn't have a medium zoom range. And now for 5x, you see, the Xiaomi doesn't give us any real options when it comes to 5x portraits. But it was recommended that if you used 5x regular photo mode, and I'm using it with like Authentic, and it looks flawless. It is giving you literal depth of field. There's so much happening there. It's a beautiful shot to say the least, and it's very impressive. Definitely something that everyone should try out, especially when you're trying to take good portraits. The 5x regular zoom does work. Also, what bothers the holy hell out of me is that regular Leica Authentic, when using regular photo mode, works so well. But then you go to portrait mode and this is the result you get. Like damn. It's just... Dude, I don't even know how to react to this. This is ridiculous. Once again, using Master Portrait does seem to rein things in slightly. Slightly. I do want to stress that. But just looking at just how perfect the iPhone looks, everything being exactly and absolutely balanced. Yeah, it is unforgivable on the Xiaomi. A bloody sin, I tell you. Anywho, let's move on to night portraits, and yeah, this time once again, look at that. The iPhone is making my skin look a little too dark. I don't really know why it happens, but it did happen 3 times in this comparison, and it's a little odd to say the least. The Xiaomi with night portraits is actually doing a really good job. It's just it doesn't have as much sharpening and detail as you can tell against the iPhone, especially with my t-shirt, but yeah, the skin tones look nice for a change. Now then, for regular night mode, so see, with the main cameras you're not gonna see a whole lot of difference. Yes, the Xiaomi does go for really high contrast, and it especially looks really nighttime-esque when you're using Leica Authentic with night mode. This shot right here, I think it just proves just how good the Leica Authentic on the Xiaomi can be. The iPhone can produce very natural looking shots and very natural looking night skies, but the Xiaomi is on a different level altogether. Also, that horizontal bit of the building that is jutting out, it's completely free floating, just so you know. It's holstered to the building, but that part has no real support, to say the least. And man, it is pure insanity, isn't it? Just thinking about the architecture blows my mind. But anyways, this is an ultra-wide shot, and see, this is where I think the iPhone kind of suffers, because the iPhone in general will just not take proper low light or proper long exposure shots, which bothers me a lot, because even with maxed out, in this case it just took a 1-second shot, and the Xiaomi took like 2 seconds, and look at just how much better of a night mode shot it is producing. To be honest, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra is probably my favorite when it comes to night mode shots, and yeah, the iPhone is not really doing much for its case now, is it? And this right here, perfect example. It is much darker in a lot of the shadows, and because the iPhone doesn't take a particularly long exposure as it should, with an ultra-wide camera especially, it's losing out on a lot of light and a lot of detail in the shadows, whilst the Xiaomi is able to compensate very easily for it. Now then, let's take a look at zoom. Now, this is a main camera shot, and I do want to make a point about this. With the main camera being as high quality as it is on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, it can keep up very well with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It doesn't really run into any exposure time issues, but with the ultra-wide camera, you do see it. Now then, for 2x, I don't really think I need to zoom in, because it should be pretty obvious that the Xiaomi's detail level is significantly higher. But well, let's just do it regardless, and yeah, you can tell. The amount of grain and the noise reduction artifacts that are present on the iPhone is significantly higher as opposed to Xiaomi, whilst also producing less detail as opposed to Xiaomi. And now 3x, well look, it's been pretty obvious, right? The 3x camera on the Xiaomi is really good, and the fact that the iPhone doesn't have it, it kind of puts it at an inherent and obvious disadvantage. But we have come this far, so why not zoom all the way into 500%, and it's very similar to the 2x shot where the Xiaomi is producing more detail, whilst also having significantly less grain and noise. Now finally we have 5x. I had thought this would be pretty much the same, but it's really not, because as you can tell, the amount of noise and grain on the iPhone, it has skyrocketed. It's not even a comparison at this point. But we will absolutely zoom all the way in, and yes, indeed, the iPhone's noise levels are, well, saying it's through the roof is quite the understatement, isn't it? So with that said, we're finally at the end of this comparison. I gotta say, this was an interesting venue to shoot at, because it posed a very different form of challenge as opposed to my regular comparisons, which are, well, kind of monotonous, I guess, but that's just the way it is. But soon enough things will be different, by the way. But anyways, what I do think is that when you're shooting in a situation like this, or even a similar kind of lighting situation, use Leica Authentic on the Xiaomi. If you want to get any kind of good shots, that's basically the way it was. The portraits though, man, it is just such a disappointment. Even now, even though I've made so many comparisons and I know what to expect from the Xiaomi, it still disappoints me every single time whenever I see the portraits, because neither the Leica portraits nor the master portraits work perfectly all of the time. At least one of them need to do, like 90% of the time at the very least, they need to produce perfect results. If that was the case with either of them, I could have at least recommended one. Now I don't even know what to do, because some of the times one of them will work, some of the times, as you saw here, neither of them will work, which is like worst case scenario. You really don't want that to happen. The iPhone's portraits, in contrast, it produces perfect results. So yeah, that's really the dilemma here. Like, I know for a fact a lot of people like to take portraits, so recommending the Xiaomi 14 Ultra for anyone is going to be a bit of a challenge. Even for me, because I rarely take portraits, but when I do, I don't want the Xiaomi 14 Ultra for that now, do I? But well, other than that, the Xiaomi is bloody fantastic. The night mode, insane. So, with that said, I'll be seeing you guys sooner with the video comparison for this one. Cheers.